wasn't exactly sure what information everybody needed and what all to include in a presentation about bereavement, because that could be 700 slides. So we just kind of put together the basics of what grief is and how to companion somebody along their grief journey. And then, of course, I'll let you know a little bit about the programs that we offer in both adult bereavement and HWKids. But feel free to interrupt and ask questions and all that good stuff. So like Lisa said, my name is Courtney, and I am, my title is Director of Bereavement. So I oversee the adult bereavement programs and our HWKids program. So sort of anything that falls under bereavement there. But I have been at Hope West, I think, a little over 2 years now, so not super long. I've gotten to work in several different departments during my time here, which has been really lovely. So when I started on the hospice side as a hospice social worker, and then all of my background in training and education is working with kids. So when a position opened up as a youth counselor in HWKids, I moved over there. And then when that director transitioned out, I took over as director of HWKids. And then just recently, we decided to combine the directorship of HWKids and adult bereavement. So then on January 1st, I took over that one. So I've jumped around a lot, but it has been really helpful because I've gotten to work with and partner with almost every piece of the organization in a different way. And being over bereavement, I have a lot of contact with the outlying offices as well. So I work really closely with our bereavement support in those offices. So I just have gotten to see an overall really good picture of Hope West, which has been lovely, and have had lots of contact with volunteers, which I always appreciate and enjoy that as well. I am from the Grand Valley. I'm from, grew up in Loma. And most of my time as a social worker here has been spent in the school district, actually providing support to families and kids before coming over and finding my place at Hope West. And my main modality that I use as a therapist is EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But I also am trained in play therapy and do lots of that. And I'm EGALA certified, so I run our equine program here in Grand Junction as well. So I guess just a little bit about me and why, I don't know, why maybe I can talk about grief. I'm not sure. So this is just a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Like I said, there's tons of things that we could add in here. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what to include, but like I said, if there's something that you need more information on, or you're really interested in knowing more about, feel free to let me know so that I can make sure that you all get out of the training what you're really hoping to leave with today. So just to jump in a little bit and talk about grief, there are some common cultural myths. And when I'm speaking about culture, I'm speaking sort of about the predominant culture here in Western Colorado, which is mostly white Western culture, right? And some of the myths that we have around grief and bereavement and mourning. So for example, there's a belief that grief and mourning are the same thing, that grief and mourning progress over predictable, orderly stages, that you should move away from grief and not toward it. Tears of grief are only a sign of weakness. Being upset and openly mourning means you are being weak in your faith. When someone you love dies, you only grieve and mourn for the physical loss of the person. You should try not to think about the person who died on holidays, anniversaries, and birthdays. After someone you love dies, the goal should be to get over your grief as fast as you can. Nobody can help you with your grief. When grief and mourning are finally reconciled, they never come up again. And death is the only loss that causes grief. I'm sure we missed some. Can anyone else think of any other cultural myths that we have around grief and bereavement we didn't get on.
I think that definitely covers it. Thanks for putting that all together on a slide for us to remember.
Sure. So when I'm talking to somebody about grief or I'm providing grief education, I almost never use any wording around stages or anything like that. Because although there might be some truth to what is in those stages, it almost never really reflects what happens for somebody during their grief. And so they can start to feel like they're grieving incorrectly, something is wrong with them, or they don't know how to grieve because it just doesn't follow the way that we're taught that it should, right? So again, there might be some truth in those stages for somebody, and they might see parts of their grief process reflected in that, but often it's much too simple for what is actually going on for somebody. So you can kind of see that here on the screen about what it might really look like for somebody, right? Where it's just ends up being this tangled ball of a grief experience rather than this nice little single path that we might follow that goes from one thing to the next, right? In a very nice order. It doesn't usually happen that way for people, right? So we talked about what myths we have around grief, but what do we really mean when we're talking about grief? So when I explain grief to a child or their parent, I say it's our thoughts, feelings, and body or physical reactions after somebody we love dies or after a loss, right? Which we kind of get at here with this definition as well. Grief refers to the internal thoughts, feelings, images of your lost experience. And I would include that somatic or the body sensations as well, right? We definitely feel grief physically. On the other hand, mourning is the outward expression of an individual's grief or grief gone public. It's the outer world expression. Many cultures have very specific rituals and traditions and expectations around mourning. So that could be anything from the clothes that somebody wears and how long they wear it. Some cultures have rules around what you can eat during that time. Some cultures have rules around staying isolated for a certain amount of time. Some cultures even have really specific expectations around like actual wailing at the gravesite or by somebody's body. So those are things that are very expected of them and how they express their grief, right? So that's what we would consider mourning. Grieving is a natural biological human process. It's a very healthy thing to do. And when we allow ourselves to have that human process, we notice a lot less issues down the road. When we try and suppress that process or avoid it or bypass it, that's often when we notice that people start to struggle, right? A resource that we use very frequently here at Hope West and that we base a lot of our work on is pretty much anything by Alan Wolfelt. He has a lot of books out there, a lovely website. One of his most accessible, easy to read books is Understanding Your Grief. So if this is something that you're interested in knowing more about, I encourage you to read that book. Very helpful. Again, it's really around a lot around how we think about grief here at Hope West and how we support people. I also like this one, Companioning the Bereaved. And we'll talk a little bit more about companioning, but this is also by Dr. Wolfelt. But his works are really great. And he has all kinds of books that cover just about any topic you can think of. So he has books to support children, books on suicide loss, books on pet loss, just kind of books on child loss, kind of all over. So he's a great resource if you need more information. These are some of the common thoughts and feelings associated with the grieving process, or some of the ones that come up pretty often, right? For where it says identification, symptoms of physical illness, hear a lot about fatigue, headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of stuff like that. Changes in energy, difficulty sleeping, right? It can manifest quite a bit in our physical body. Can anybody think of any other ones that we need to add on here of different thoughts, feelings, physical things that somebody might experience during their grief process?
Don't all talk at once. Half of my team's on here.
Oh.
I was thinking of guilt.
Absolutely.
Or maybe just putting time frames around when you allow yourself to grieve. I guess that's kind of time distortion. I was thinking more time distortion is more like you don't realize how much time's gone by since the person passed or the pet passed or whatever. But maybe more of, okay, I'm at work, I don't grieve now, but when I get home, I grieve, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so putting expectations on ourselves around what our grief should look like, how long it should take, that kind of thing.
That's a good one.
And that's such a good point too around, what do I do if I'm at work, right? And it is okay to, I think, so sometimes we put this expectation on ourselves that we don't grieve at all. And then some people swing all the way to the other end where they think I should only always be grieving, because if I'm not, then that's disrespectful to the person that I lost, right? So we have to find that balance. And there's a couple models that talk about this, but it's okay to take breaks from your grief. It's okay to just want to be somebody at work that's doing their job. It's okay to just want to be, playing at the park with your child. We don't always have to be in our grief process. And grief usually swings like that. So sometimes we're very much in our grief feelings, right? Sometimes we're very much future focused and thinking about what life looks like now and how it's changed, how it's different. And sometimes we're just doing life right here in the middle. So it swings like this, right? There are also a lot of factors that can influence someone's grief and how they experience grief. So no two grief journeys are going to look the same, even for the same person. Each time they have a grief experience, it's going to look different. And there are so many things that go into that, right? From the relationship that they have with the person, the circumstances of how the person died, their personality, their cultural background, their faith, religious, spiritual background, right? Other things that are going on in their life, past experiences that they may have with death that they may carry into this one. There are just so many different things that can go into what somebody's grief experience is going to look like. Can anybody think of any others that we probably missed? You didn't know I was going to quiz you this whole time. Welcome to a training with Courtney.
Hi, this is Geraldine. I'm here in Montrose this afternoon. Certainly, I had just a little bit of experience with the age of that person that you're dealing with. And then you really have to, I think, really know that person, know that young person or extremely adult age person a little bit more about them, because yes, they may respond in these same ways listed, but it may be some way that you wouldn't anticipate either. So
Absolutely.
I guess you really listening and observations would be helpful then.
Yeah, I agree. So of course, there are different types of loss, right? So we have death loss, which is or anticipated death. So like when somebody comes onto our hospice services, and that's a lot of what we deal with here at Hope West, obviously. But there are lots of other non-death related losses that we also experience, and we grieve each of those as well. Although it is much less common in our society to give ourselves space and to give others space and grace to do that. So we have a couple listed here, like loss of a relationship, loss of a job. Can anybody think of other examples that are types of loss that we would grieve or mourn?
Hi, this is Karen. Loss of a pet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I include that in a type of death loss as well, right?
I was thinking when people go missing, I know somebody personally who's loved, somebody went missing and they just never found them.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We also have things like moving, right? So that could just be moving homes, or that could be moving states, moving countries, moving continents, right? Even if it's a choice that we made and it's got good pieces, we still definitely grieve the loss of wherever we're moving from, right? So moving can be a big one. For kids, something like changing schools can be huge. When we think of serious illness, even if it's not terminal, there can be a lot of losses that come along with that. Loss of health, loss of feeling safe or secure. If we're talking about like cancer and somebody's getting chemotherapy, we can talk about loss of hair, right? Sometimes we're talking about loss of like financial security. Yes, Christine, do you have a question? Oh, you're on mute. Christine, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Christine. There you are.
Excuse me. Loss of a home. We've had so much of that in Colorado in the last little bit. I think
Yes,
a terrific loss.
yes, absolutely. And if we, all those, just recently, Buffalo, New York had those massive blizzards where a lot of homes and things were lost, a lot of property damage. And California recently has had a lot of flooding, again, a lot of loss of homes and property damage. And that also, again, goes along with that loss of feeling safe and secure.
I really love the way you use the language amongst your team with significant change. I think that really puts all that in a nice little package.
Agreed. Yes. Significant change.
Another loss that Roy had put in the chat was a friend of his son lost his hand. And so maybe sometimes the loss of being able to do certain things, or maybe even the loss of routine. So sometimes routines and all of a sudden you lose that routine because you've lost that person or you've lost that job or whatever. It just, it's a compounding loss.
Oh, that's such a good one. Yes, they love that. With kids too, it'll come up a lot, depending on the loss that they've had, especially if it was a parent loss. The roles in the family can often change significantly. And sometimes they can be asked to take on more adult roles or responsibilities. And so we talk about loss of childhood with them.
And we were thinking about loss of independence.
Yes, yes,
Fine.
that's a good one. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit, I mentioned it earlier, but we're going to talk a little bit more about companioning and what we really mean by that. I'm afraid that people have probably seen this video from Brene Brown, but I'm going to go ahead and play it just in case somebody here hasn't. But this is a really good way to start to think about how we can companion somebody. I just feel like everyone's seen it, so maybe you'll just get to see it again. First, they're gonna sell us some shoes.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with four qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, is an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversation is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
That's a good introduction to sort of how we can start to frame for ourselves what companioning somebody who is grieving looks like. These are just a few points to keep in mind. But companioning, when we say that, what we mean is being present to another's pain, listening. Somebody said that earlier. I think it might have been Christine. Somebody said, you know, it's really important to listen to understand what their grief is going to look like, right? Going to the wilderness of the soul with another human being, honoring the spirit, listening with the heart, bearing witness to the struggles of others, walking alongside, discovering the gifts of sacred silence, being still, respecting disorder and confusion, learning from others, being curious. And help is not always tangible. It's not always something that we provide. Sometimes it's time, right? So one of the important things to keep in mind is that it is not our role to fix. Grief is not something to be fixed. There's not something wrong with somebody who's grieving. They are not ill, right? They are going through a natural biological process after a loss, and we can't fix that for them, but we can come alongside them. Some things that companioning is not taking away the pain. It's not thinking that you are responsible for finding the way out, not focusing on the intellect or intellectual parts, not analyzing with the head, is not judging or directing these struggles. It's not leading or being led. It's not the need to fill up every moment with words. It is not a frantic movement forward. It is not imposing order and logic. It is not teaching, and it is not expertise. In fact, I love that it says that it's not teaching, right? Because really what we're doing when we're companioning is we're always in a learning goal. We're always trying to stay open and curious about each person's individual grief process and learn from them what theirs is. Questions about companioning so far and what we mean when we say that.
Courtney, would you also say that that would be companioning even for people like our patient care volunteers that are out there, maybe with the family members as they're doing anticipatory grief?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good one.
Because even so, you know, when we think about that anticipatory death, right, and that anticipatory grief, a lot of, and we've talked about that grief happens with all of our different losses. Likely the patient and the family at that time has already experienced a ton of loss that they are already grieving, right? So they are already in a grief process. So companioning already fits for them, right? But somebody had mentioned like loss of independence. That is a huge one that comes up for our hospice patients and palliative care patients, right? So often they're grieving that. They might be grieving that they weren't able to stay at home, right? They might be grieving feeling healthy and safe and secure. They might be grieving financial issues, right? So companioning definitely comes into play for all of our Hope West patients, whether they're PACE, palliative care, hospice. So what does somebody need in order to be able to companion, right? Empathy, need to be able to listen, be non-judgmental, be comfortable with somebody's expression of grief through tears, understand an appropriate use of self-disclosure. So it can be really tempting when somebody is teaching us about their grief to say, oh, me too, or oh, I had this thing happen. And sometimes there can be a place for self-disclosure. And a lot of times that is gonna take away from the other person's grief, right? We're centering ourselves in that time. Appropriate physical expression of compassion, right? So knowing when somebody might appreciate a hug or a pat on the hand or a hand on the shoulder, and when somebody is not open to those things. Being able to, or having knowledge of grief journey, which we've been talking about. Familiarity with different grief support resources, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end, what we have here at Hope West. Having good boundaries, right? So being sure to keep that line between this is this person's story and pain and this is me, and I'm not taking that on, right? So that doesn't mean that we don't have empathy and compassion for them, but we're not taking it on as our own. And then practicing self-awareness and self-care, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Notice on here, we do not say that you need to have a counseling degree, right? Or any sort of level of education. That's not really what companioning somebody is about, right? It's more about that human connection. We're not going to go too much into this, but there is a neurobiology or interpersonal neurobiology aspect of companioning. So one of the things that we can think about is attachment styles, right? So if we are the person companioning somebody else, we're obviously looking to go towards a secure attachment or have a secure attachment style. Where the other ones, like if we had an anxious attachment style, that might really affect the way that we would companion somebody who's bereaved. Right? And then something to always keep in mind, or something that's always at play when we're interacting with humans and animals, is mirror neurons, which I'm sure you all have heard a lot about. But mirror neurons in our brain are responsible for our ability to understand quickly and instinctively what others feel and experience. They encode not only the movement, but also the intention. They help to differentiate facial expressions, which is important to develop empathy. So people on the autism spectrum likely have less active mirror neuron network. That's one of the things that they think for ASD. But when we're thinking about companioning somebody, both sets of mirror neurons are fired. So ours are trying to help us understand that person's experience. So we're looking at their face, we're looking at their body language, we're looking at their movements and listening to their words and the meaning behind them to try and understand what this person is going through. But their mirror neurons are doing the same thing with us. So their mirror neurons are interpreting our facial expressions, our movements, our body language, our words, right? And the intent behind them
Tassel's machine
to make sure that they can trust us and that our intentions are good, right? And that we have empathy and compassion for them. So that's just something to keep in mind, that we don't just communicate through words. I think the current research shows that about 90% of communication happens outside of those words. So we want to always be thinking about what we're communicating to the people that we're communicating. So I know we've talked a lot about listening, but these are just a few things to keep in mind as we think about when we're saying listening, what we really mean. So it's, we can think of it kind of like mindfulness, which is being present or being in the present moment without judgment, right? So we're paying attention, we're withholding judgment. A big part of listening skills can be reflecting. So reflecting back what they have said to you. Clarifying or asking for clarification if you don't know or if you're not sure that you understood what somebody meant. Summarizing what we've heard in the conversation. The difference between reflecting and summarizing: reflecting is reflecting back a small piece of what you've heard, and summarizing is more like summarizing big chunks of or paragraphs or larger pieces of the conversation. And then sharing. Can anybody think of anything else that we need to, any other skills that we need to make sure we have when we're active listening?
Perhaps body language.
Body language, yep. Facial expressions. When everybody was wearing masks for COVID, that was a huge thing that people would always say was, I'm out of practice watching my facial expressions because they've been behind a mask. So I need to relearn how to monitor my facial expressions when somebody shares something. There is a handout that I think Lisa said she was going to put in the chat, and it's also I think in the invite, that's sort of a what to say, what not to say handout that can be really handy. But we'll talk a little bit here about things that may not be as helpful for somebody if we say them. So a lot of them we heard in the video that we watched from Brene Brown, right? But anything that's minimizing, so telling them that it could be worse than it is, or the at least, right? We want to avoid the at least. Want to avoid comparing. So that's something that we do a lot to ourselves, is compare our pain to somebody else's and sort of minimize our own pain, because we say to ourselves, well, somebody else somewhere has it worse, right? Which can be really harmful and not allow us to go as deep as we need to in our grief journey. So we don't want to do that to somebody else we're companioning. Solving or giving advice without being asked. So if somebody asks you, of course we want to provide any tips or advice or help that we can. But if they haven't asked for it, we really want to avoid that place of have you tried, or you should, or you need to, right? Inappropriate self-disclosure, like we talked a little bit about earlier. So that centering ourselves during that time and talking about our own grief journey rather than allowing them to go through theirs. Pat answers, so that's like giving somebody a pat on the back, right? So it will get better, they're in a better place, things like that. Imposing our beliefs, so that could sound something like God has a plan for you, or it was part of God's plan. What else could we add that maybe would it be super helpful during companioning somebody?
I know I had a friend who lost a son, and it was just, every time she asked or it got brought up, they would ask, well, what happened? You know, and I don't think that's appropriate to, you know, have people reenact it or have to explain what happened.
Yeah. Great point. If they bring it up and they want to share, right, then we want to be there to listen, but we don't want to let our curiosity to know more overshadow our work as a companion. There are some other ideas on that handout, but I do think it can be helpful. And so we'll talk a little bit more about kids and grief. So I did include some handouts for you in there. So there's 10 things that grieving children want you to know, which can be really helpful. And then the navigating children's grief, how to help following a death, is also very helpful. That one breaks it down by developmental age and stage. So it kind of tells you for each developmental stage what they can understand about death and dying, what behaviors you might notice in the grief that can let you know that they're grieving, and then things that you can do as a supportive adult to help them in that time. So that's a super handy little worksheet. Now, of course, it's very general, right? So each child has their own grieving process. Grief is going to look different for each person. That is true for children as well as adults, but it can be very handy, especially looking at those behaviors, because children communicate to us through behaviors, right? And so when we're looking at different behaviors, it can be helpful for us to remember as their supportive adults, this might be part of their grief, right? They're not just being bad or acting out. This is how they're expressing their grief to us. Right? So just a couple things I want to point out about kids and grief. Not even that long ago, there was a belief that kids didn't really grieve, right? That until they had more of a concrete level of thinking and were around the age of like 7 to 10, that before that, they didn't really grieve, right? And we know that that is not true. We know that babies, infants, tiny, tiny little babies grieve, right? And they know when there has been a change in their environment. They know when there has been a loss of their primary caregiver. And they, again, will show us through their behaviors. So we will notice that, for tiny babies, that's fussiness or a lot of crying, or, that being very different than their normal, difficulty or changes in sleep, difficulty, changes in eating, difficulty being consoled, right? So we know that everybody grieves, and it is, like we've been talking about, that biological process that everybody experiences. Kids grieve in spurts more than adults. And we kind of say the younger the kid, the smaller the spurt, or the smaller the amount of intense emotion, right? So if they're very young, like 3, we're looking at minutes of that intense emotion. And then as they get older, we notice that intense emotion, the bursts of intense emotion will increase. It's very normal for kids, especially when they're younger, when you tell them that somebody has died, it's very normal for them to kind of pause, maybe think about it for a second, and then say, okay, can I go play? Which can be really hard for adults, because the adult might feel like, well, are they even sad? Did they care? Did they understand? Did I do a good job explaining? But that's just really how kid brains work, right? So the death of somebody is often the largest amount of information that we've asked that child's brain to process. And it just takes time for everything to get down the funnel and for them to understand. So we can think about it sort of as a funnel, and we've dumped all this information into their brain, and the funnel lets out a little bit of information at a time. And so they'll process it a little bit at a time as it makes it down the funnel, right? And so it's very normal for them to take a large amount of time to understand what you're saying, or to really process it, or have a big reaction to it. It's very normal to need to repeat yourself over and over and over. They will come back with questions. They'll ask you over and over just to make sure that they understood. And it's very normal for them to not show a big reaction right away, or sometimes not at all, right? They are going to continue being kids, whatever that has meant to them. And so it just looks different than it does for adults. I often recommend books as a good resource for adults or parents that are talking to kids about death, for several reasons. One, if we can find a good book, that is in that child's age range, it gives really age appropriate language for the parent or the caregiver to use. It's a good sort of way to approach or broker the conversation that feels maybe a little more comfortable to the child and the adult, because we're doing it through a book. It's also really helpful for kids because they can start to see themselves and their experience reflected in the book, and it begins to normalize it for them. On our website, we have a ton of books listed for different age ranges, but a couple of my favorites for the younger kids are When Dinosaurs Die. Super helpful book that talks about what death means, talks about different types of death, which is very helpful. Reactions, or what kids might experience during their grief. And then it also does a really good job of explaining different beliefs that different cultures have after somebody dies. So it covers a wide range of things. It's very, very helpful. I also really love Lifetimes. So it talks about everything that's alive has a time to be alive and a time that it dies. and it talks about the different lifetimes of different things. So a fly's lifetime is different than a worm's lifetime, is different than a rabbit's lifetime, it's different than a person's lifetime, is different than a tree's lifetime. So it just does a really good job of covering all of those things. Those are a few of my favorites. And then, of course, you can always yourself call Hope West Kids for some help, or direct them to call Hope West Kids. So a lot of times people will just call us for resources or for advice, or want to know how to tell their child that somebody has died. And they're not really looking for counseling or groups at that time. They're just needing that telephone support in the moment, which we can absolutely provide. It's always okay for you to call and ask for some help, or for them to call. That's our number down there in the corner. I'll get you to Hope West Kids. I think I covered most of this one on that last slide, but so that one handout that I was talking about that talks about the different developmental stages. Other thing to keep in mind with kids is that a lot of times they will re-experience their grief when they hit a new developmental age or stage. So if they have a very significant death loss happen when they're 5, they can come to us for support, and we will help them process and work through their grief as a 5-year-old. But when they hit a new developmental age, say around 7 or 8, or even later, they might re-grieve that death and might need to come back to us for support again, because their mind, their body, and their heart can understand and experience grief at a new level. And so the work we did when they were 5 was great, but now they have a different understanding of grief, and their brain understands it in a different way, and their ability to feel those emotions has grown and express those emotions has grown. So they might need to come back for help. So it's very common for kids to come back to us throughout their childhood. Like I said, on our website, there is lots of great resources. So we have book lists for different ages. We have newsletters that have lots of great information and resources. We have guides about how to talk to kids about different things. So a guide around how to talk to kids about a serious illness, a guide to talk to kids about when somebody has died. I think there's a guide about children and funerals. So there's lots of great resources on there. We have some downloadable activities that families can do together to start to process some of that grief. So check out that website if you're needing extra resources, and feel free to send people there as well. Any questions about children and teens and companioning them, or supporting an adult who might be companioning a child? Great. We're going to talk just a little bit about self-care. In the handouts, there's a blank self-care wheel. So it's this wheel, but without the different ideas in there. So I really encourage you as a Hope West volunteer who's doing incredible but difficult work to think about how you really care for yourself, right? So we know that when we take care of ourselves and when we are compassionate to ourselves, that increases our ability to be able to be compassionate and empathetic and caring with somebody else. Okay? So these are just a few of the different categories that you want to consider when you're thinking about how you care for yourself. And I encourage you to identify at least some ideas in every one of these categories to really have a complete plan for self-care. So the first category is psychological. So a couple great ideas in there would be things like self-reflection, keeping a journal, drawing or painting, reading a book, going to therapy or joining a support group. Emotional, they're laughing, saying I love you, watching a funny movie, practicing affirmations and forgiveness. For spiritual, going into nature, finding a spiritual community, playing, dancing, volunteering, which you all are already doing. Personal, learn who you are, making goals, fostering friendships, writing a poem. And professional, taking a lunch, I need to always be better about that, setting boundaries, taking classes, right, using vacation and sick days. And then for physical, eating healthy, exercising, getting sleep, massages, walking, spending time away from cell phones and other screens. What else should we add in any category? Or what are some of your favorites from here, some of your go-tos?
I think as volunteers, it's important for us to get together. I mean, I don't know where that would fit in there. We try to get together every month at least just to touch base and, plug in a little bit, share experiences.
Yeah, I think that fits under personal there with like fostering friendships.
Yeah.
But I think it could also fit under spiritual, as you all have kind of come together and created your community, right?
Mm-hmm. We do hard work. You got to have some place to put it, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think one that we just don't do enough as we get older is play. There's a really great book around playing and how important it can be for adults. And of course, I can't think of the name of it, but if I can think of it, I'll send it to Lisa. But finding things that we just do for fun that bring us joy and laughter is really important. And we just don't do enough of that. So sometimes even when we're thinking about hobbies, we can get caught up in, oh, it's supposed to be fun, or not fun, sorry, I'm supposed to be really good at it, or it's supposed to make me money, or somebody else can do it better than me. And then it loses that aspect of play when we start to do that comparison, right? Yeah, Roy.
Yeah, got it. Well, one of the things that they do at our church is we have a cappella singing, and we have like every month or two a get together where that's all we do is get together and sing hymns. And it, to me, is very, very uplifting personally, and it could be for anybody.
That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. Beautiful. So please do take some time and fill out that wheel for yourself and find some go-tos in each of those categories, just to make sure that you are really being kind and compassionate with yourself, so that you have the capacity then to offer that to others as well. these are just a couple of things to keep in mind. I think we've talked about all these, but when you are companioning somebody, and so either maybe you're doing a bereavement call with them, or you're visiting them in the home, or joining a group, we want to be clear when we speak. Less is more, so we're doing less of the talking and more of the listening. We don't really have an agenda. We're just being flexible and letting them show us what they need, right? We don't fix it. And have some ideas of resources of where you can send them. So what's great about Hope West is that really you can send them to us, to our staff here if they're needing extra support, and we have wonderful things in place for them. So let me actually bring up a different PowerPoint real quick so I can show you a little bit about what the offerings that we have here in our programs. So, we do have grief and bereavement support in all of our offices. So we have people stationed out of here in Grand Junction, and we cover the Plateau Valley office and their needs. We have somebody in Delta, a couple in Montrose, and then I'm understanding that most of you are from Meeker, so you all have the lovely, incredible Brittany Turner up there, who helps with adults, kids, and helping with some palliative care needs as well. So we do offer this to all of our areas, and some of our offerings are virtual, so that anybody from any of our service areas can join. So one thing that we try to do is make sure that we have a really balanced offering of our different supports in all the different offices. But of course, we're looking at just one person in an office, it's very hard for them to offer everything. And so having some of those virtual options allows people from different areas to join and get groups and things that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So as Hope West Bereavement, and this is true for adults and kids, we are what's considered a community program, which means that yes, we serve people that are hospice connected. So that could be they're on hospice services, they're on palliative services, PACE services, but we also just serve anybody in the community as well. So in Hope West Kids, we serve about 20% of our kids are connected to hospice in some way, and 80% of them are just community referrals. In adults, it's a little more even, but it's about 40% hospice, 60% community. We can support people with a death loss, again, whether that death happened on our services or not. Anticipatory death, so at the time that they come onto our services, or if they've chosen a different hospice or don't want hospice services, but they know their person is terminal, they can get support for that as well. And then we also just support with serious illness. So on the kid side, often what that looks like is maybe a parent or a caregiver was diagnosed with cancer. They're expected to make a full recovery, but the family needs support in the meantime. But also sometimes it's that the person has been diagnosed with a serious illness. So we have supported kids that have gotten their own cancer diagnosis, or like a multiple sclerosis diagnosis, and other things like that. So we try and cover a wide range, but of course we have not a lot of staffing, so we do have to keep our focus a little more narrow there. Many of our clients on both adult and kids participate in several programs. So they might come to us for individual counseling and then do a group, and then sometimes kids do camps. This is just a sort of a brief overview of all the different things that we have. I will say that I think that our bereavement services are, we offer a really wide range and depth of services that a lot of other hospices don't have. So Medicare says, right, if you serve hospice patients that are Medicare, you have to provide 13 months of bereavement support to the family, friends, and caregivers of that patient, but they don't say what it has to look like. So that could just be 13 months of newsletters. It could be a couple bereavement calls. It could be groups. It could be individual. It could be memorials. But they don't really say what it has to look like. And so most hospices have a couple of those offerings, but we really have all of those things in both adult and Hope West Kids and more. We always have individual counseling as an offering in all of our areas. For Hope West Kids, a large part of what we offer are our school groups. So in all 5 of those school districts, we have lovely relationships with the schools there, and they allow us to come into their schools and run school grief groups alongside the school counselors to support kids at school in a place where they feel comfortable with their peers, and it cuts down on parents needing to figure out how to get transportation and all those things. So we have a lot of success with our school groups. Forget Me Not is our family group. And that's one of the times that adult bereavement and Hope West Kids comes together. Here in Grand Junction, we offer one in the fall and one in the spring. So we have our next one coming up in March. And then we're working on getting one off the ground in the Montrose Delta area that will probably happen in the fall. But it's a really, really amazing group where it runs 8 weeks. It's in the evening, and we provide dinner every night. So first we come together, we have dinner, and then we all split off into our age groups. So there's usually 3 counselors. One counselor will take the adults, one takes the little kids, and one takes the older kids. And we all work on the same brief topic, but just in our own way and in our own developmental, keeping in mind our own developmental needs. And then we come back together and close. It's a really popular group, very fun. In Grand Junction, Beaker, and Montrose, we have equine groups that we offer, and hopefully can get one in Delta when our counselor there can be trained up on that. We have tons of adult groups. Really the best way to know what we have going at any given time is to look at our website, and you can kind of see the different offerings that we have. But then if somebody's interested, they'll want to call our office or send us an email, and we can kind of let them know what's open. We just have so many going on at any given time that it's hard, and they change times and days. It's hard to always have an accurate like flyer or something. So the best way is for them to reach out. And then once we know a little bit about them and what their situation is, we can help them find the right group for them based on location and need and all those things. But just a couple of the ones that we have, we have caregiver connections, which is for people who are caring for a sick or dying person. We have drop-in grief groups where it doesn't matter what your loss was, how long ago it was, you don't have to commit to any certain amount of time. You just come when you can, and it's just a safe place for people to talk about and express their grief, learn from one another, and create those connections. Here in Grand Junction, we have our Angel Babies group, which is for infant and prenatal loss. In Junction, we also have a men's group, which has become pretty popular. And then most of our, actually all of our offices, they offer a Mending Hearts group a couple of times a year, which is a 10-week closed group. So we do ask that those people commit to the 10 weeks, but they work through a really beautiful curriculum that's based off of Alan Wolfeld's work. So lots of offerings going on at any time. So feel free to have them reach out so we can get them connected to the right service. We do tons of community education. So we are a small staff that cover a wide range or a wide area, right? A very large area. And, you know, for adults bereavement, we're looking at, we serve, you know, usually between 400 to 500 people a year. And Hope West Kids, we serve between 600 to 700 kids a year. So we got a lot going on, and we know that there's a lot of kids in these areas, or a lot of people in these areas that we're missing. So one of the things that we do is community education. So we try and provide as much information and resources to other people in the community that might also be companioning somebody who's bereaved, because we know that we just aren't able to serve everybody by ourselves. So we want to spread the knowledge and spread the wealth so that others feel comfortable to companion as well. So we do lots of community education for like CMU here in Grand Junction, police departments, victim advocates, different things like that. One of the things that Hope West Kids is really well known for is our camps. So in a non-COVID year, we try and run 3 camps. So that is our Itty Bitty Day Camp is just a 1-day camp that happens here in Grand Junction. And that's for our kids entering kindergarten through 2nd grade. Camp Good Grief is our big one. So that's kids entering 3rd through 8th grade. And that is an overnight camp that happens up in Camp Cedar Ridge, and we usually take around 60 kids. And then in the years where we can gather enough teens who are willing to do an overnight camp, we will also do a teen retreat, and that happens in Meeker. And then we also have our support letters for both Hope West Kids and adult bereavement, which can be found and downloaded from our website, that have lots of ideas for resources, lots of ideas for activities, and connects them to other websites that have other information as well. A question that we get a lot is like, how much do things cost and what do people pay? So for individual counseling, there are some insurances that we can bill. And if they're hospice connected, they get 4 free bereavement sessions with us. And if they come to us and they're hospice connected before their person has died, then they get free anticipatory support as well. And then if they aren't hospice connected and they don't have an insurance that we can bill, then we have a really generous sliding scale fee that looks at their income and sets a price based on that. And then groups mostly are free right now, other than Equine has a small registration fee, but mostly we're not charging for groups at this time. And then camps have a really small registration fee as well. But the thing to always keep in mind is that we never turn anybody away. So if something does have a cost that isn't reasonable for their family, we have scholarships and waivers, and we can get that cost down to whatever they need in order to be able to participate, even if that is 0. And then, of course, we have tons of you lovely volunteers that help us out to make sure that our programs are successful and run well. So we are very, very grateful for all the support we receive from all of our volunteers. I want to open it up to some questions and make sure that I covered what you were hoping to get out of this presentation, and let me know if there's anything else that we need to talk about.
Just wanted to let everyone know that I did share all of those presentations in the chat, and each of the volunteer coordinators in the regions also have access to those documents. So if you need to get additional support there, we have it here for you. Thank you, Courtney. This has been wonderful. Anybody have any questions?
Just to say thank you. That was really nice to see everyone and to hear your presentation, Courtney. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. You're so welcome. So in the chat here too, I will put my email address. I could spell it, that would be helpful. I think that's it. You're always welcome to reach out to me personally if you need additional resources, if you have questions, you just want to know where to send somebody, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. We want to be a resource externally for the community, but also internally for anybody who works here at Hope West.
And Courtney, that's recorded, right? And so all of the chat messages will be still in that link. We can go back to it anytime.
I think so.
Okay. I know we had a few volunteers that wanted to participate that couldn't get on at this time, but we'll have them follow through with that.
It is being recorded. I'm not sure if on the recording you'll be able to download those documents. So, but we will have them in the Better Impact where the volunteers sign in for their volunteer hours. They'll have access to the documents there as well as the recording, but please give us some time to get the recording done as I have to go through education and they're being able to download that for us. So
thank you for all your efforts with that.
Okay, well, it was really lovely to get to see you all and spend some time with you. Like I said, please reach out if you need anything, but thank you again for all of the work that you put in for Hope West. We are so grateful, and be sure to take care of yourselves as well.
yes,
There's
thank you.
Diana's lovely face.
And also we have our bereavement services are open up to our volunteers. As we know that, you know, volunteers and staff handle a lot of grief. And so sometimes you need some additional support. So you're always welcome to reach out to us here in volunteer services and we'll get you in contact as well for that.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you all.
You.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.